Let me start with the part of the new ABA 509 data that should make everyone pause. Law schools didn't just get more selective this year, they also took on more risk. And you don't see that risk in LSAT medians or GPA charts, you see it in law school class size decisions. Because when law schools feel confident, they behave cautiously. When they feel pressure, they expand. And this cycle, the data shows that law schools were under real pressure. Now, most coverage of the new 509 data focused on the obvious takeaways. LSAT medians went up a little bit, GPAs rose, and applications surged. All of that's true, that's all quite obvious. But those are outcomes, not decisions. The real story here is how law schools responded to uncertainty and what those responses signal about what comes next. And to see that clearly, we've got to start with something most people overlooked: the GRE. For years, law schools framed the GRE as a strategic shift. They were modernizing, they were giving more access, and they were going to be less reliant on a single test like the LSAT. But this year, GRE enrollment dropped by roughly 25%. And already on its own, that's pretty notable. What makes it meaningful is when it happened. This drop of 25% occurred in a year when law schools expanded class sizes. So this wasn't simply an effect of contraction. Schools didn't shrink and accidentally cut GRE students in the process. They grew, but they still relied less on the GRE. And that tells us something important. When schools feel confident, they're more willing to experiment. But when they feel exposed, they consolidate around what they trust. And when pressure rises, the LSAT is still the metric that law schools fall back on, especially when they are enrolling more students and increasing their downstream risk. And that brings us to the most consequential choice law schools made this cycle. Class sizes increased by almost 10% on average, adding more than 3,000 additional 1Ls nationwide. And that came on top of last year's expansion. And so that's 2 consecutive years of growth. This is a structural change. But the key detail is that that growth was not evenly distributed. The schools with the highest LSAT medians only expanded a little bit. The largest increases occurred at the schools with lower medians. And that pattern tells you who felt the most pressure to act. The schools with fewer built-in advantages like ranking, status, outcomes, reputation, those schools face the most risk when applicant demand eventually softens, as of course it will over time, due to, in part, the coming demographic cliff. And so when applications surged, many of these schools made a rational short-term choice: enroll more students now, get more revenue coming in the door, and deal with the consequences later. And in a normal cycle, a meaningful share of those additional students simply would not have been admitted. That's a description of how this sort of marginal expansion works. Because class sizes are not just numbers on a spreadsheet, they change the lived reality of law school. When there's more students, the grading curves tighten, there's less academic support available, and career services has a lower staff to student ratio. So there's more competition and less support. And students feel this kind of shift immediately. Their orientations are going to be larger sections in class, less access to faculty. That's just simple math. And so based on the size of these increases, it's kind of hard for me to believe that most schools predicted this accurately. I mean, a jump of 10 to 12% in enrollment is far beyond your standard yield fluctuation, which means that many schools likely enrolled far more students than they originally planned. And so schools are going to have to respond going forward, and there are only a few realistic options for those schools. They could, of course, reduce class sizes. They could hold enrollment flat and just tighten admissions going forward, or they can keep expanding and hope demand stays strong. And of course, every option comes with associated trade-offs, and all of those trade-offs will land on applicants and students themselves. And so, of course, LSAT medians rose, GPA medians rose. LSAT medians on average increased by about 1 LSAT point. GPA increased by about 0.03. And that sounds impressive, but context matters. Because when applicant pools increase, the medians are going to essentially have to rise by definition. It doesn't mean that schools became more selective by choice. It just means that they had more room to choose, and that's what leads to inflation across the system. And so reality is going to reassert itself when we get to the bar exam, because fewer than half of law schools have first-time bar passage rates above 90%. And fewer than 100 schools even exceed 80% bar passage rates. And those numbers become concerning when you pair them with expansion, because class size growth does not affect the top of the distribution that much. It loads the risk into the bottom of the distribution. If schools are taking on more marginal admits, those students are going to have weaker buffers, higher stakes. In other words, those are the students who are more at risk. And so 3 years from now, those expanded cohorts are going to graduate into the same job market with the same bar exam, and employment outcomes are going to be a bit tighter, more scrutiny around bar passage rates. And so class size is the single most revealing variable in the entire ABA 509 data set. It shows you how much risk schools were willing to assume and ultimately who absorbs that risk. And none of this happens in a vacuum, of course. Law schools are facing rising fixed costs. They have more faculty compensation to consider, more facilities costs, administrative overhead. And at the same time, we've got a lot of uncertainty around federal student loan policies given the discontinuation and the limits around the federal Grad Plus loans. And that tuition revenue is extremely attractive for the schools right now. So even when the schools understand the long-term risks of its expansion, those short-term incentives are still powerful. And so going forward, I'm going to predict we've got tighter admissions going forward. We're going to see more normalization of class sizes and heightened scrutiny going forward around employment and bar passage rates. And so when you are looking at schools, I want you to stop evaluating them based on medians alone. I want you to also look at class size trends, because the rapid expansion in student numbers will affect your experience as a student in a way that rankings simply does not capture. And also, don't think only about getting in. Think about what will competition look like in law school itself and which law schools are going to best prepare you for the bar exam, because you are taking on personal risk of potentially 6 figures in student loans and, of course, 3 years of your life. And so the schools that expanded aggressively in the short term will eventually have to adjust. That's why these numbers matter when you are looking at law schools. Look at the ABA 509 reports, look at the LSAT medians, the GPA medians, the bar passage rates, and employment outcomes. Now, I see a ton of questions coming in here into the chat. I will get to as many of those as I can. So please be patient. I see a lot of questions here. I'll get to as many as quickly as I can, but I also want to answer thoroughly. And when I answer the question, I'm going to try to keep my answer broad to apply to as many people as possible, because I know a lot of folks are watching both now and later. Before I get into those, though, I want to let you know that I'm offering free LSAT tutoring lessons to everybody out there watching this now as well as later. The link is unpluggedprep.com/start. The link is below the video on YouTube, in the chat on YouTube pinned, as well as in my bio on TikTok. Again, the link is unpluggedprep.com/start. One question here asking about the LSAT cheating scandal in China, asking, will they remove online LSATs and go back to the original format of paper? Quite possibly, yeah. I mean, I certainly hope so. I think that is ultimately going to be the only way for LSAC to ensure the validity of the exam, because any online LSAT or any online exam is at risk of getting hacked. It's essentially an arms race. I'll share more on that in a little bit. Chicken Fingers is asking, I've got a 3.7 GPA at Tufts University with a good LSAT score. Can I still get into a good law school? Yeah, I would certainly think so. The question, of course, is how do you define good? What's a good LSAT score? What's a good law school? It's all relative, right? So I would define a good LSAT score as at least a 165 or above. A couple of years back, I would have said 160, but there's been a lot of LSAT score inflation. A good law schools, are you talking top 50, top 30, top 14? For reference, the top 14 law schools all have GPA medians of 388 to 39 and up. They all have LSAT medians of 170 to 174. And those medians just keep rising. Like I mentioned, LSAT medians rose 1 point over the past year. They rose 0.03 over the past year as well. So don't look at numbers from a couple of years back. Make sure that you're using up-to-date information. Like I was just commenting on the most recent ABA 509 data that was released a couple days ago. Eugene's asking, what happens when an applicant with a 2.2 GPA scores outstanding on the LSAT? Well, it makes you a so-called splitter applicant. Splitter being you've got a relatively higher LSAT, but a relatively lower GPA. I'll be honest, a 2.2 GPA is not great when it comes to law school admissions, just due to rampant grade inflation. Like I was saying, T14 LSAT medians are all 388 and up. And so it makes you a splitter applicant. Of course, it shows them that your GPA does not adequately reflect your law school performance or predict your law school capabilities, because your LSAT score is an additional data point showing that you are a better standardized test taker than you are an undergraduate college student, of course. You also want to have great application essays as well. So your GPA is probably pretty fixed at this point. It is what it is. You might want to write an addendum if there was some sort of personal crisis of some kind that led you to have a lower GPA than you otherwise would have. And then you want to balance that with the higher LSAT, and you want to talk about that in your application essays, maybe write an addendum. TJ is asking, does a master's degree count towards work experience? Specifically speaking, I would say no, because academics is not work experience, right? A master's degree is academic in nature, meaning that it is reflecting your additional coursework beyond undergrad. Work experience is work, like employment, and that could include internships. Broadly speaking, maybe we're going to include volunteer work as well, but work experience, strictly speaking, is a job, either part-time or full-time. And by the way, a master's degree GPA is not factored in to the calculations for your LSAC GPA. Your LSAC GPA is undergrad only. So when law schools are looking at you strictly based on the numbers, they're looking at your LSAT score and your undergraduate GPA. They're combining those numbers together into what they call an admissions index, and that is a rough proxy for your chances. I'm not saying soft factors like essays don't matter at all. They do matter a little bit, but the process is primarily numbers driven. Just Dylan is asking, what type of law specialization has the best work-life balance while having high or good pay? I'll admit that's a bit more outside my area of expertise. I focus primarily on the LSAT, and I also talk law school admissions as well, but employment and work-life balance, what kinds of law you pursue, that's not my area. I would talk to practicing attorneys, reach out to alums on LinkedIn, reach out to friends and family on LinkedIn, and ask friends of friends for input on this. TJ comments, it's more about law firm size than specialization. I think that's a pretty good point. I mean, if you know, big law, you could work in big law and work in a wide variety of different practice areas, but big law itself, larger, more corporate firms are not going to be quite as good on the work-life balance. In contrast, smaller firms might be better for work-life balance because they're not as cutthroat. If you open your own practice, of course, then you get to decide what kind of balance you want to have, but I think that's not really particular to any particular type of law. Eugene's asking, why doesn't grad school GPA supersede undergrad GPA? Well, because not everybody has a grad school GPA, and law schools want to compare apples to apples, not apples to oranges. And so comparing two different folks with undergraduate GPAs, it's a more standardized comparison, right? Because you both were at the same rough age, so to speak. You both had to take a variety of different courses in undergrad, presumably, whereas in a master's degree, you're typically on average older, and you got to choose more specialized courses that play to your strengths. Undergrad, you might have different requirements that go outside of your specialization or your preferences. And so it might ding your GPA a little bit. So because not everybody has a grad school GPA, law schools just push those aside entirely and they only look at undergrad GPA. They will see your grad school GPA technically, they'll be able to look at it, but they're not going to give it the same weight as they will your undergrad GPA. Maria's asking, what LSAT score do you recommend for a GPA that's in a low range? Maybe you're referring to the previous commenter with the 2.2 GPA. I mean, I always recommend a 180, right? No reason to shoot for anything less. Always aim for the highest LSAT score possible because that will give you the best possible outcomes in terms of bar passage rates and employment upon graduating. And you want to offset a low GPA with a higher LSAT score. It is really the best and really the only, I say only, quote unquote, but it's the primary way to offset a low GPA is by getting a higher LSAT score. So I'd always recommend aiming for 180, nothing less. You might want to go for 170 plus, of course, if you feel like 180 is out of reach, but always give it your all. Always aim for the highest LSAT score possible. Typically takes more than a month to get there, though. I recommend ideally 2 to 4 months to achieve your fullest potential. Perhaps you could do it in less time, but to maximize your outcomes, give yourself at least a few months. Bailey's asking, what are my feelings on fully online programs that have ABA accreditation? I think it's awesome. I wish that more schools offered fully online programs. It's really a matter of the American Bar Association being a bit stingy in granting the provisional accreditation for online programs. If you are looking online, there are a couple of schools that I'm aware of that are fully online. There's St. Mary's Law School in Texas. There's Syracuse University Law. There's also Mitchell Hamlin, which is one of the first hybrid programs that was accredited. There are others as well, of course, but those are some you might want to look into. Keep in mind that because there is a lot of demand for those online programs and the demand outstrips the supply or availability of the programs, and so they're a bit more competitive to get into than their in-person counterparts. So you may need higher numbers to get into one of those online programs, but I think it's great because then you don't need to relocate. You don't have to pick up your life, especially if you have family, kids, in-person work. If it's hard to relocate, then online means you don't have to, of course. Gingerbread's asking, does the major for undergrad really not matter? Correct, it really does not matter what you majored in. You can major in literally anything at all and go to law school. You could major in humanities, you could major in the sciences, doesn't matter. The thing though, of course, is that there's more grade inflation in the humanities than there is in STEM fields. And so it's easier to get a top GPA if you major in the humanities, which is more prone to grade inflation. So if you wanted to be totally ruthless in getting the best possible GPA for the best possible law school chances, I would say major in something where you can get a top GPA, where there's not a brutal curve like there is in a lot of STEM classes. I don't think that's fair, of course, but it is what it is. And law schools have no reason to care about what you majored in because it's only the raw numbers that get reported to the American Bar Association, which in turn is where US News pulls the data from for inclusion in the US News rankings. La Actriz is asking, is there anything an applicant can do if for any reason they cannot retake the LSAT, but their current LSAT score is lower than the school's medians? So if your current LSAT score is lower than the medians of the schools to which you're applying, ideally you want to have a relatively higher GPA to make up for that. In other words, you would be a reverse splitter with a high GPA and a low LSAT. My question, of course, would be why aren't you able to retake the LSAT? They removed the limit of taking the LSAT 3 times in 1 year. So now the only retake limits are you take it max 5 times in 5 years, 7 times for life, and if you get a 180, you can't take it again. So my first question is, have you already taken it 5 times in the past 5 years? If so, maybe you want to appeal the retake limits to get an exception to those. It's possible, of course. Let's say you had terrible proctors, terrible tech issues, you were sick, maybe LSAC will grant you an exemption to the limits and then allow you to retake more. And if you're concerned about timing for the cycle, the January LSAT is not too late. for this cycle. Neither is the February LSAT too late for this cycle as well. You could take either of those and still apply to law school this cycle. If we're pushing back to April, of course, or June, then I would say probably you're going to want to hold off on applying because that is a bit late, and you're going to want to instead apply in the fall to start law school in fall 2027. But you could take it in January 2026 or February 2026 and still start law school roughly 6-7 months later. And by the way, folks, I do these free live stream classes and Q&As every single weekday, same time, same place, 2 p.m. Eastern, 1 Central, 11 Pacific, on YouTube and TikTok. If you find this helpful, please spread the word, share it on your socials, share it to your feed. The only way this grows is through word of mouth. I don't do any advertising for these, and so I really do appreciate your support here. Question here from Shoefly asking, if I have a 3.89 GPA, can I round up? I mean, the short answer, no. You don't get to round up and report your own GPA. What's on your transcript is what's on your transcript, and LSAC takes your transcript, then they do their own adjustment to give you an LSAC calculated GPA. But just as you can't round a 169 LSAT score to be a 170 because it looks better optically, you can't round a 3.89 GPA to be a 3.9 just because it looks better. Your GPA is what it is. The only way to improve your GPA is to take more classes in undergrad or to retake a class potentially. But in my view, that's really not super beneficial just because it's going to have a very marginal impact and you're going to get a lot more return on your time invested by just getting a higher LSAT score. Moses is asking, does a school's bar passage rate matter if you don't plan to take the bar? Well, first off, I'm curious why you don't plan to take the bar. I mean, if you're taking the LSAT and going to law school, I would think that you probably want to become a practicing attorney, right? That's usually the best path forward. I usually recommend against going to law school, taking on the time investment and the potential debt and all the work involved, just to not be a practicing attorney. If you're doing it for street cred, for your resume, for credentials, I mean, sure, but you could learn the same information more easily without taking on the debt and the time. That being said, a school's bar passage rate could serve as a valuable proxy or indication of the quality of the student population and the quality of the support that the school offers its students. I mean, Harvard and Yale law schools have pretty good bar passage rates for a reason, right? They have a high caliber of average student quality. The quality of their instruction is also pretty good as well. But it's rare to have an amazing law school with a terrible bar passage rate. And so I'm guessing you probably want to go to a good law school over a bad law school, and bar passage rate serves as some indication for quality. Additionally, schools with terrible bar passage rates are also at more risk of getting citations or being put on notice from the American Bar Association. You don't want to start at a law school that gets closed down before you're able to finish, because then you're kind of in a tough spot. So I would say you probably want to go to the best law school possible that also offers you as much scholarship money as possible, all else being equal. And there's a trade-off there, of course, between prestige of the school and the scholarships they offer you. So it's all about finding a happy medium or balance between the two. Akai is asking, does working at a big law firm for a few years give you a leg up in getting into law school? Yeah, it could certainly help. I mean, working at a law firm, let's say as a paralegal, for example, it shows law schools that you have a real world understanding of what the actual practice of law is like, in contrast to folks who have no real world exposure to the practice of law and only know about the law from, say, watching Suits or Better Call Saul, right? So if you have that work experience on your resume, then of course, highlight it, talk about it in your application essays. You don't need to have that kind of experience, of course, but if you do, it can certainly help. Now, I got a question about the possibility of LSAC discontinuing the online LSAT and going back into the paper format only. And there is, in fact, strong reason to believe that cheating is still happening on the LSAT. There are still cheating services being sold online, and there's clear evidence that the software used to cheat on the LSAT has not disappeared. Some of these cheating rings and organizations, these businesses, are even posting screenshots from recent LSATs including the November LSAT, that do appear real. And that sort of detail matters more than most people realize because LSAT scores have been rising very fast. There's a lot of LSAT score inflation. And some of that is expected. Students are prepping better. People are retaking the LSAT more often. But when the score inflation lines up closely with reports of working cheating tools, admissions is going to start asking questions. And that is a real issue because the LSAT is one of the few tools that is supposed to mean the same thing for everyone when it comes to law schools evaluating students. And law schools are taking a closer look at very high LSAT scores and comparing them more carefully to grades. They're asking for more writing samples and doing more follow-up work on applicants who look too clean on paper. And when schools scrutinize high scores more, the burden falls on honest students also. And the students who earn those scores fairly now have to prove themselves again in other ways. And I've been teaching the LSAT for 20 years now, and I know that admissions officers are not lazy, but they are overwhelmed. They're reading literally thousands of files, and they have to rely on tools they can trust to make reasonable decisions. And there are credible claims that the same people who sold LSAT cheating are now selling cheating on law school exams using the same software, using the same tactics. We don't know the size of the problem, but it was recently happening at Cornell Law School. And there's a basic rule with online cheating where if it happens once, it usually happens more than once. And law schools should not treat this as a small risk, but rather as a warning. And so if I were a law school administrator right now, I would be extremely careful because this impacts trust in professional training. And of course, if you cheat in law school and you get caught, you're not going to become a lawyer. And of course, you might get caught once, you might get away with it once, you might get away with it twice, but you will not escape it forever. Character in fitness exists for a reason. You will have spent years and money chasing a shortcut that ends your career. And of course, even if you don't get caught, cheating does not prepare you for real law. Foundational law school courses are hard because they matter. Contracts, torts, Civ Pro are the basis of legal thinking. And if you don't understand them well enough to take an exam honestly, you will not be a capable lawyer. And the bar exam makes this even more clear because the bar exam is taken in person. There's no Wi-Fi during the exam. Everything is checked. Cheating is much harder, and the same material shows up again and again. Cheating only delays the moment of failure. Now, online testing for the LSAT did solve a real problem during the pandemic when testing centers were closed. And at that time, remote testing was the right move because there was no alternative. But it should have been temporary because what we're seeing now is the limit of that format. When the LSAT is online, it's harder to control. In-person testing solves a lot of these problems at once because everybody's in the same room, everyone follows the same rules, everybody faces the same limits, and of course, that doesn't eliminate cheating entirely, but it does reduce it and make it easier to catch. And so I think it's a good move that LSAC suspended online testing in mainland China, but I think they should discontinue the online testing everywhere because we live in a global internet-connected world. What happens in one country is not limited to that country alone. And LSAC is not doing enough to address the issue. There are reports that the cheating continued beyond October, and LSAC is not speaking enough about this publicly to instill confidence in the administration. LSAC has said clearly they know it's not limited just to just China. They know it exists elsewhere, but we don't even know how large the problem is. And the questions for admissions are now, can I trust the LSAT scores I'm seeing right now? And can I trust they will mean the same thing next year? And so this is an existential issue for the LSAT, not because the LSAT is bad, but because the LSAT only works if people believe it is fair. And so I predict that at some point, possibly even next year, LSAC will move back to only in-person testing. And secondly, law schools will change how they test students. Possibly, they will resort to using physical blue books, closed book exams, and at least one oral exam, which I think would be awesome because lawyers argue out loud, courts are spoken spaces, not written, and law school education is focused on writing. Oral exams are harder to cheat on, and they're closer to real practice. And so, of course, do not cheat. Shouldn't have to say that. Don't explore cheating. Don't talk to people offering help or DMing you on Reddit. Don't believe anyone who who claims they can fix an LSAC hold on your report, because that is a scam. The LSAT still matters because it measures real thinking, but LSAC has to maintain the validity of the exam with in-person testing only. And so, to be clear, I do expect that law schools will continue to trust LSAT scores because they have no choice but to do so. And that is still the primary exam for law school admissions. But I do think they will be encouraging LSAC to resume in-person testing only to maximize the validity and the perceived accuracy of the LSAT scores. Nancy is asking, how do I get a one-on-one session with you? So I'm actually offering free LSAT tutoring lessons to everybody watching this now and later. The link is unpluggedprep.com/start. You can access that link through my bio on TikTok, in the description on YouTube, and pinned in the chat on YouTube as well. Again, the link is unpluggedprep.com/start. Open offer to everybody watching this now and later. Private one-on-one sessions. I'll help you talk through your plan of attack for whenever you're taking the LSAT, whether it's January, February, April, June, or beyond. I'll help you craft a personalized plan of attack to help you reach your goals whenever you're taking the LSAT, now or later. Just scanning through for other questions here. Jessica's asking, does it really not matter where you get your BA as long as it's in an accredited school? Yes, it really does not matter. You can go to any undergraduate college or university in the country and still go to law school as long as you earn your BA and complete it. Then you're good to go for law school. And law schools don't really care about the prestige of your undergrad. And so if I wanted to purely maximize for finances and law school admissions, I would go to a lower ranked undergrad, possibly a state school, maybe go to community college for the first 2 years, then transfer to a public 4-year university, earn a BA with minimal debt or zero debt, lowest possible tuition, get the highest possible GPA, and then apply to law school and take the money I would have spent on undergrad tuition, save it for LSAT prep to get the highest possible LSAT score, then get a full ride scholarship to law school. And it's even possible, by the way, to get paid to go to law school, because on top of full tuition, you can also get a living stipend if your numbers are strong enough, so that you literally get paid to go for law school, which I think is a good move, considering that there is a big opportunity cost when you choose to go to law school for 3 years because you're not working during that time. You are typically not allowed to work during law school. Law schools do not permit this because law school is so time consuming. It would be really difficult to balance a full law school course load while also working full time. Of course, you can go to law school part-time and work full-time. That's a different story, but easier said than done. It's pretty hard to work a full-time job and also take on part-time law school simultaneously. There are folks who do it. I think it's incredible, but really difficult to navigate that balance. Just scanning through the chat here for other questions coming in. Joshua says, I failed out of college at 18, but came back at 28 and graduated with a 3.65. How much will that impact me? So what you're saying is that you failed out of college 10 years ago, maybe even longer than that. So who you were at 18 is not who you are at 28 or at 30 or 32 or however old you are now. The more time that has passed since a negative event, the more law schools will discount that negative event, because who you were back then is not who you are today. You've grown, you've changed, you've matured, and you got a pretty decent GPA. 3.65 is not bad. And so if you want to write an addendum to describe what happened way back when, you certainly can do that, of course. You don't need to, of course, but might not be a bad idea. Just really concise a couple of sentences talking about the circumstances that led you to fail out back then, and then show how you've grown and changed since then. Don't try to excuse it. Don't blame other people, of course. Just explain matter of fact what happened back then, and then show how you've grown over time. And of course, you're clearly showing an upward trend in your grades, which is awesome. And Jess is asking if I have a YouTube channel. Yes, I do, actually. The link is in my bio on TikTok. The channel is simply LSAT Unplugged. And so the recording of this live is going to be on there under the live tab, as well as every previous live I've done and all my other videos going back the past 7 years, literally thousands of videos all organized by topic and by difficulty level on the playlist as well. Fo839 is asking, how do softs factor in your application, especially if you're 5 years out of college? And so in law school admissions, it's primarily numbers driven. So LSAT score, first and foremost, is the biggest factor in admissions. Then secondary, you have your GPA. Then a distant third is everything else, like your application essays, personal statement, optional essays, addenda, resume, letters of rec. They're all a distant third. So first and foremost, you want to have the LSAT score. Secondly, you want to have the GPA. If you don't have those numbers, I wouldn't even think about the other stuff. Get the LSAT score, get the GPA. Of course, your GPA might be pretty fixed at this point, but your LSAT score, you still got room to improve. The LSAT's offered 8 times a year. Coming up, we got January, February, April, and June. Then you'll also have 4 times in the second half of the year as well. This past year, it was August, September, October, November, 4 consecutive months. And you could take it 5 times in 5 years. Over the course of 5 years. So you could take it 5 times in 1 year if you wanted to, not saying you should, but you can. So I would first nail down the LSAT before even thinking about the other stuff. And if you're more than 5 years out of college, your undergraduate GPA will matter a little bit less, and your LSAT score will matter a little bit more. Got some questions on my pricing. Just Dylan's asking, why do I charge no fee for LSAT help? And Jessica's asking, how much are my services? And so I'm trying to both help those who cannot afford LSAT prep and also help those who can. So I can't offer all my services for free because I got to pay the bills and got to pay my coaches as well, of course, but we all have our own expenses. But I also want to give back to those who cannot afford LSAT support. And so the way I do it is a split tier system where I offer free LSAT tutoring to literally everybody out there. And so the link again is below the video, in the description, in the chat, in my bio. I offer 1 free LSAT tutoring lesson to everybody out there, 0 charge. And then if you're looking for additional support beyond that free lesson, of course, I have paid services for more in-depth help. And so we offer intensive private one-on-one coaching programs like our LSAT Bootcamp, for example. We have longer-term programs as well where you can meet with a coach on a weekly basis. We also offer live small group sessions via Zoom. We offer on-demand video courses, custom study plans. And so, of course, the more in-depth programs do have an investment associated, but if you can't afford that and you just want a single free lesson, of course, you could take that and do nothing else, and that's totally cool as well. Osher's asking, what is the best way to start studying for the LSAT? So what you could do is you could take a free practice test as a cold diagnostic on the LSAC Law Hub website. They publish a handful of exams there for free with your free lsac.org account. Don't place too much weight on that score though, because they'll just tell you what you already know, which is that you have not yet learned the language of the LSAT, but of course you can over time. Then beyond that, you just use it as a benchmark from which to measure your future progress. And so I divide LSAT prep into 5 phases. We have the LASER approach. LASER is an acronym standing for Learning, Accuracy, Sections, Exams, and Review. So the learning is that building the foundation in the different sections, the different question types, getting the lay of the land in terms of what the LSAT's testing. Then A is for accuracy, drilling questions by type to better understand the proper perspective from which to view each particular question type. Then S is for doing individual timed sections to work on your pacing. E is for exams and endurance, doing full-length timed practice tests to help build up your LSAT stamina. And then R is for review, using the Socratic review method to drill down into exactly what you're getting wrong and why, so that you can avoid making the same mistake again. And so if you are, say, devoting 6 months to your LSAT studying, you could devote 2 months to the learning and accuracy phase, building the foundation and drilling, 2 months to doing individual sections and full-length exams, and 1 month for more exams plus more in-depth review, and then drilling weak areas on the side. And then those ratios could extend throughout whatever your study period is. And so if you're doing it over 12 months, then you just double it. If you're doing it over 3 months, then you cut those timeframes in half. And if you want to talk through your personal situation, I can help you craft a plan of attack, of course. You can book that free tutoring lesson with me at unpluggedprep.com/start. And if you're taking the LSAT in 2026 or beyond, you actually have less material to study than almost any previous LSAT generation. There's no more logic games on the test, fewer practice tests available. And so if I wanted to score a 175 or above on the LSAT in 2026 or beyond going forward, here's exactly what I would do. I want to anchor you with one thing first, though. Scoring a 175 or above is not about perfection. It is about consistency. A 175 is the top 1% and only allows for a couple of wrong answers. So the real challenge is not about knowing everything, it's about controlling your process, especially when the LSAT throws something annoying at you. Could be a tough reading count passage, a weird logical reasoning argument. You could have tech issues, a bad proctor, a loud neighbor. And so students who score a 175 or above, they're not smarter than anybody else. They're just calmer and more systematic. And they know how to recover quickly. And so everything I'm about to share is built on that foundation. Now, the LASER approach is an acronym standing for Learning, Accuracy, Sections, Exams, and Review. And that framework works whether you're studying for 3 months, 6 months, or longer. It lets you reduce overwhelm and work in the right order without skipping steps. The first month is learning and accuracy, building the foundation. This is where you learn the core LSAT concepts slowly, carefully, and with a high quality, crystal clear understanding of logical reasoning structure, common argument patterns, conditional logic, necessary versus sufficient assumptions, causal reasoning. And so if anything I just mentioned feels shaky, that's where you start. Then secondly, you drill questions by type. You want to focus on the big 3 to start with that show up most often: necessary assumption, inference, and flaw. When you're drilling, you're doing 20 to 30 questions of one type in a row. You're not going to mix them up yet. That teaches your brain the proper lens for each question type. We're focusing now on mastery rather than speed. And when you can explain why each wrong answer is wrong, you are then and only then ready for the next stage. The second month would be timed sections to develop your pacing. And this is where students discover the truth about the LSAT. The LSAT is not hard because of the content, it's hard because of the clock. The 35-minute time constraint is brutal, but it becomes manageable when you understand the order of difficulty. In logical reasoning, the first 10 are generally easier, 11 through 20 are medium, and the last handful tend to be the hardest. And so you should not spend equal time on each question. You want a time bank. So for logical reasoning, you knock out the first 10 questions in roughly 10 minutes or so. You build up a time bank so that you can then invest more time in the harder questions later in the section. Now, most students do the opposite. They overspend early, getting bogged down, and then they panic later. So I would flag questions, maybe flag 3 to 5 questions to protect your score so you don't get bogged down, you don't get stuck, and you can come back later with a fresh perspective. Now, a top scorer knows when to cut losses and protect their time. Then in month 3, we transition into full exams and endurance. You've already built the foundation, you already have the knowledge, you've already worked on the timing, and so now you're going to build stamina and emotional control, taking several full-length exams, ideally at least 10 of them. And for most people, that's doing 1 or 2 full exams per week, same day, same time as your official real test, with the same breaks, with 0 distractions. Because you want to know what it feels like to hit the 4th section tired, frustrated, drained, but still be able to perform at a high level. You also want to simulate real test day conditions, same computer, same room, same clothing, same water bottle and snack. And it feels silly, but you want to rehearse every single thing down to the most minute detail. Now, the secret weapon that's too often ignored is deep review using the Socratic review method. Most students think reviewing means checking the answer key. But that's not reviewing, that's grading. If you want a top score, you've got to understand why you got something wrong, why it was tempting, why the right answer felt unappealing, and how to prevent that from ever happening again. That is the essence of the Socratic review method, which I use with all of my students. Now, every wrong answer is built on one of two traps. You either have traps of encouragement that pull you toward wrong answers, or traps of discouragement that push you away from the right answers. If you don't know your personal tendencies, whether you overtrust strong language or you misread group versus individual or get distracted by irrelevant details, you will repeat the same mistakes forever. A top scorer, though, knows exactly which traps catch them. Now, if you've got 6 months or longer, the plan's the same, but extended over a longer period of time, but the same principles apply. When you have more time, I think it's awesome because you give yourself more breathing room, which typically leads to higher scores because you can avoid burnout. Now, if you take nothing else, remember this. The LSAT rewards systems, not intensity. You gotta stick to the right process in the right order with the right mindset. You build the fundamentals, the accuracy, the pacing, and the endurance, and you review with both honesty and curiosity to drill down to the root cause of your mistakes so you can avoid making the same mistake again. And that is how you hit a 175 in 2026 and beyond. Now, Dylan's asking, is freshman year of college too early to be thinking about LSAT prep? It's not too early, but I would probably say focus more on your GPA for now, enjoy freshman year, maintain the highest GPA possible, explore whether law school is really what you want to pursue, and then if you discover that it is, then you could start studying in sophomore or junior year. It's still enough time. I think that, at least speaking personally, I changed my mind several times in the course of freshman and sophomore year about what I wanted to pursue with my career. And so I think that it might not be wise to pursue the LSAT just yet because you may change your mind. Now, if it turns out that you've been wanting to do nothing but be a lawyer for several years throughout high school, throughout freshman year, and you're dead set on that, then yeah, you could go ahead and start studying for the LSAT. But maintaining a top GPA will also help you with that goal. And so I'd say enjoy for now, focus on your GPA, and then circle back in a year or so, and that'll be enough time for you to hit whatever LSAT score you want to hit. That could be a 175, could be a 180. A year is more than enough. Royal Republican's asking, I'm set to graduate from a large state university at 19 through dual enrollment. My GPA is a 383. I'm scoring a 163. Would you recommend me still going KJD? Okay, so congrats on graduating college fairly early. That's awesome. A 383 is a pretty awesome GPA. I'd like to see you get a higher than a 163. If you're there right now, you could bring it up. I would want you to bring it up ideally 10 points at least if you can. A 173 is going to open a lot more doors for you than a 163 will. And there's no reason to rush it. You're only 19. I would say maybe take it in April or June. Give yourself 4 to 6 months to keep studying, then apply in the fall. I wouldn't want you to rush it for January or February for this cycle because I think that you could raise your score a lot more with the additional time and you'll still be able to start law school at age 20, 21, which is still quite young. And you may not want to be that much younger than all your classmates in law school. You can, of course, but you might enjoy it more socially if you're closer in age to those you're going to law school with. Some folks are asking me about where to start with studying again, what the framework was. So the framework was the LASER approach, LASER being an acronym standing for Learning, Accuracy, Sections, Exams, and Review. If you want a recap of any of that I shared already, go to the recording of this video on YouTube under the live tab on the channel, and you'll be able to rewatch this entire live as well as all the other previous lives and classes I've done. You'll be able to see me walk through all of those. Kofi's asking, I took the LSAT before and I got a bad score. I study here and there. What's the first step for me to take on my journey to retaking it again in April? So you've got 3 to 4 months to study for an LSAT retake. The general principles still apply for everything I shared around self-study using the laser approach. The one difference I would share for a retaker in particular is that I would love for you to drill your weak areas specifically. You don't need to do a solid overview of every section, every question type. You just need to focus on your weak areas. And so if there's a certain LSAT question type in logical reasoning, a certain reading comp passage topic that typically gives you trouble, I would focus on those on the side. But then doing timed sections, doing full exams, all of that remains the same. And you could take a diagnostic just to see where you are today if it's been a little while. But the LSAT is a test of pattern recognition. It's a skills-based exam, not memorization. And so whatever your weak areas were before, they might still be the same weak areas again, and you still got to course correct and shore up any of those gaps. The chalice is asking how you negotiate from a partial scholarship to a full ride. So the best way to negotiate is to be in a strong negotiating position by having strong numbers. And so having a GPA above a given school's median, having an LSAT score above a given school's median, those are the best ways to raise your standing and to make yourself a more attractive candidate so that they're going to want to give you more money in order to attract you to their school in particular. Now, if you're already done with the LSAT and you're not going to retake it, then you negotiate by having good alternatives as well. And so if you have multiple offers from different schools, you can then go to school A if that's your top choice and say, hey, school B offered me more money. I really want to go to your school instead, but they just offered me a full ride or offered me a lot more money. So if you could match or exceed what they're giving me, then I'll choose your school instead. And a full ride's a pretty attractive offer. And so if you already have an offer of a full ride from one school, then another school, provided that you're an attractive enough candidate, will have more reason to give you more money to woo you to their school instead. So this comes down to having more schools give you more and better offers. You do that by having better numbers and by having more offers of admission. You get more offers of admission by having better numbers and by having more schools that you've applied to. And so if you could retake the LSAT, that's going to make you more attractive if you get higher numbers. And if you can apply to more schools, you will have more offers. And so applying to even 15, 20, 25 schools is not too many, especially since you can reuse the same essays across multiple schools with minimal changes. So if you could stay organized, write a lot of essays, juggle all of that, keep a spreadsheet of all of them, then applying to more schools is a pretty solid move, and I would recommend it. Matt asks, should I apply this cycle with a 161 or should I wait a year? I've taken it 3 times and I'm 23. A 161 on average is not going to get you into the top tier schools necessarily. You might want to retake, but I would need a little bit more context in terms of what you put into this so far. So you said you've taken it 3 times. How many months did you study for? Did you take courses? Did you get coaching? In other words, I want to know, are you leaving points on the table or have you already maxed out what you're willing to put into this? If there is an additional resource, additional support that you could have gotten, but you didn't get, and you are willing to put in the time, I would say retake. On the other hand, if you feel like you've reached the end of the road and you're feeling pretty burnt out about it, then, and the schools you're looking at you're already above numbers with your 161, then maybe you're good. Your GPA is also a factor, of course, so I would consider that. But it may be that if you're willing to wait a year and retake it in April or June, if you think you could get even a couple points higher, it might be worth delaying things a year. I would need more context, though. And so if you want to talk through your situation with me, Matt, or anyone else for that matter, you can book that free LSAT tutoring lesson with me at unpluggedprep.com/start. Link is below the video on YouTube, pinned in the chat on YouTube, in my bio on TikTok as well. I'm happy to help out and meet with anybody watching this now or later. Open offer. Again, that's unpluggedprep.com/start. And if you find these lives helpful, by the way, I offer this every single weekday, same time, same place, 2 p.m. Eastern, 1 Central, 11 Pacific, here on YouTube, TikTok, Instagram, wherever else you're watching this. Natalia asks, I'm PTing in the low 160s and my goal is a 170 by February. I want to go to UCLA Law and apply next cycle. Okay, so you want to improve roughly 10 points in a month and a half for UCLA Law. and you're applying next cycle, okay, so I mean, in that case, you may not need to take it in February. If you're applying next cycle, you could take it in April or June, apply in September to start law school roughly 1 year later. You could knock it out by February, but that would require a bit of a more intensive approach like what we have in our LSAT boot camps. So if you want to book a call with me, we could talk through the boot camp approach. But if you want to spread it out a little bit more, you could go for April or June to lock in your 170 at a more relaxed pace and then still get into UCLA law on your time frame. Tom was asking, is a 3.3 GPA in finance too low for law school? And is 6 months enough time to study for the LSAT? So 6 months is enough time to study for the LSAT. And a 3.3 is not necessarily too low. It is below a lot of the medians due to out of control grade inflation, but you can balance out your lower GPA with a higher LSAT. And I'm glad that you have 6 months because you don't want to rush it. To study for the LSAT cold in just a month or two is not ideal. I'd want you to give yourself more time to achieve your fullest potential, especially as a splitter to offset the lower GPA. But 6 months, you could take it in June. And for folks asking, is this GPA too low or is that GPA too low? It's all relative. It depends on the medians of the schools that you're looking at. The top 14 law schools all have GPA medians of roughly 3.9 and above. The lowest is 3.88. And so anything below 3.88 is below medians for those top 14 law schools. And even the top 30 all have pretty high GPAs medians as well. But if you have a 3.4 or 2.7 or 3.5 or whatever, and you're below median, you could still balance it out with a higher LSAT score. You just want to give yourself more time to achieve your fullest potential. And a higher LSAT score, like a 170 plus or 175 plus, can offset a lower GPA. I can't do chances for every single school, for every single particular stat, but you can look at the medians in the newly released ABA 509 reports for all nearly 200 ABA approved law schools. They were just released a couple days ago. You'll be able to see exactly what the medians are for every single one of those approved law schools, and you'll know where you stack up relative to those numbers. And again, if you want to talk through your situation, I could give you more custom personalized advice based on where you're at versus where you want to be at. And so again, you could book that free LSAT tutoring lesson with me personally at unpluggedprep.com/start. Link below the video on YouTube, pinned in the chat on YouTube, in my bio on TikTok as well. Open offer to everybody now and later. We always customize the coaching programs if you want more support based on your time frame, your goals, where you're at now relative to what you want to achieve. And so I'm happy to talk you through your situation. Just book that free call with me. And by the way, folks, I'll be back tomorrow, same time, same place. If you find this helpful, please spread the word. The only way this grows is through word of mouth. Appreciate your support. I'll see you all tomorrow. In the meantime, I wish you all the best. Take care.